Hey, it's Andrzej on Software. Today we've had a discussion internally at RKNC about commands, events, and where do events belong when you have multiple bounded contexts. I do receive this question quite often also outside of RKNC, so I thought that while replying to our discussion in the form of a podcast internally for RKNC, you can also listen to it outside. So the discussion started with Rafał asking on a specific project whether events are part of the ubiquitous language. Ubiquitous language is the specific language for a domain. And given this, which our reply is this: is it good that we put those events in multiple bounded contexts? Which I'll try to define what it means to put them inside. So the way I see it, and I know there are multiple approaches here, so it doesn't have to be the only one, but the way I see it and the way it compiles in my mind and works correctly is that we have multiple bounded contexts, and each bounded context has its own ubiquitous language. So that's the language you communicate with within this bounded context, and it's specific for this bounded context. It doesn't have to mean anything outside of the domain. And then events, they belong to the bounded context. But they are published, and things outside of the bounded context can see it. There is another discussion whether we want to go for a distinction between public and private events. Here, let's assume we don't have this distinction. So all events which are published globally, so whichever part of the system wants to react to this, they can. So this is about events. Then we have commands. And the way I see commands, because there are multiple definitions of commands, but the way I see commands is a command is a single request for a change within a bounded context. So a command belongs to a bounded context. It's a command. It's like a request for changing. And as such, I believe it's handled. There is a command handler, and this command handler ideally works with one aggregate, and then it communicates with the aggregate somehow, tells the aggregate to make some change, and if the change is applied, then event is published. So far all is good. But then you will quickly have situations where one bounded context, which will publish some events, it will publish the event, and another bounded context would like to do something as a reaction to this event. It's a common situation, and usually we do it with an event handler. And I saw in my project, I think it wasn't working well when we were reacting from one to an event from another bounded context within another bounded context, and just as an event handler. And the reason is that it creates a coupling, and the bounded context now relies on an event which comes from somewhere else. It uses some other language. But how to reduce the coupling? The one idea that I came up with, and it's not. I'm using it. I didn't come up with. I probably borrowed it from somewhere. Is that we have a layer of code above bounded context. I like to call it application layer, but I'm not sure if that's the correct name. And in this layer, we have this what I call the global configuration. And in this layer, you can say when this event happens, we translate it to a command to another bounded context. And this way we make this second bounded context unaware of the incoming event. So we reduce the coupling. Instead, we have some kind of code, kind of boilerplate code, where we translate the event which was coming from bounded context 1. We translate it somehow, maybe using some simple logic, to a command which belongs to bounded context 2. And then we issue this command, so we probably send it to a command bus, and the second bounded context has a one command handler for dealing with this specific form command, and it knows what to do with this. So this way, I believe we have a nice decoupling, and we have a clear boundaries here. So events from one bounded context, they don't leak into other bounded contexts. There are also read models involved if we do secure REST, and we do. But in read models, I'm more relaxed. I'm okay with read models being coupled to events from several different bounded contexts, because they are very specific for one part of the read model, and that's totally fine for me. There are some consequences of this approach that I explained now. One consequence is that there is some boilerplate code between publishing the events and preparing the command, but I found it very simple usually. And another thing which you still need to solve is how to call, and this is a popular debate also within RKNC, what is a command? I see command only as a specific thing within a bounded context. I don't think of a command for the whole system. So, for example, when the user changes something on the UI, they change something on the form, and then they submit the form. This is an important thing, an important request to our system, to the whole system, but it's not specific for one bounded context. So I'm not saying that those are commands. I try to avoid this name in this specific context. So maybe there are form objects, maybe there are some kind of requests, maybe there are use cases. Maybe there are application services, because application layer lives again above, and then you can translate them into smaller commands for specific bounded context. That's what I would do. But there is like another school of thinking in DDD, is that you actually have a command coming from the UI. I don't like this approach, but I see it also very popular. So just for being fair, I want to also mention it. But once you have this approach, then it's much harder, I think, you need to find a different way of resolving the coupling between commands and bounded contexts, and also the events and bounded context. But all in all, I think whichever way you go, it's probably okay. It's just good to make those clear boundaries. I hope it was for you clear to understand. Feel free to ask me questions wherever on Twitter, or the best and easiest way to catch me is on Snapchat. So if you want to talk to me about certain things I talk on this podcast or somewhere else, you can just add me on Snapchat and call me there, or just type something for me there, and that's the fastest way to reach me. And thanks for listening, and thanks for the people who were talking to me at the Wrocław RB conference, and they were missing the podcast, and I will try to get back now more often, and this is thanks to you, because I wasn't really sure if anyone listens to this. I don't have access to good stats for that. Thanks, and have a good day.